Welcome to FFC Top 3, a show where we, your FFC hosts, count things down from 3 to number 1. Thank you for joining us this week. If you have a suggestion for top... Oh my goodness, I cannot do this right now. Reading things. Reading things enthusiastically is going to be interesting tonight. Take 2. I'm sure you're keeping these for bloopers.
Yep. Nope. Not at all. I would never, ever do that.
Always. Can't see the flip off that's happening. There are 2 fingers high in the air for you.
I'm number 1.
You are number 1. Number
Tipsy.
2 if I put the hands together.
Tipsy music lover.
A tipsy music lover for sure. Woo! Alright. Welcome to FFC Top 3, a show where we, your FFC hosts, count things down from 3 to number 1. Thank you for joining us this week. If you have a suggestion for top 3, be sure to drop us a note on Twitter at FocusFireChat, in our Discord, or even email us at focusfirechat@gmail.com. This week, we are talking about our top 3 fictional locations, or fictional settings, because we're doing a whole episode on world building. So, for top 3, we're going to talk about what our favorite fictional settings are that we have at the moment. Blue and I are alone this week, so I'm going to make Blue go first. What is your number 3, Blue?
For the fictional settings, I would have to say Destiny is my number 3. Just because I really enjoy the undercurrents of hope that they keep infusing into it, especially like Destiny 1. Actually, I liked that because it was much more, it was less gritty. I don't know if that makes sense. Destiny 2 kind of is
more lighthearted.
Yeah, Destiny 2 is kind of, I mean, Destiny 2 is still T for teen, but they're kind of drifting into that, or really, like, you know, that little Batman-esque, we're going to be tough thing, which is really annoying sometimes. But I mean, I don't have a problem with it, but as far as like fictional settings, I like the kind of, I don't want to say it's lighthearted, but the more openness that Destiny 1 had, and we'll get into that actually within the actual episodes, because there's a different approach for building worlds that Destiny took, as opposed to some different models that I actually prefer. So there's a reason why I kind of feel more drawn towards the Destiny 1 world instead of the Destiny 2 world. I mean, it's the same world, but it's just the process of the way they built that. I don't know. That probably doesn't make any sense. Destiny is my top 3, or my number 3.
Yeah, it does make sense though, because Destiny is also my number 3, in so much as the world of Destiny has been fleshed out to be not only this post-apocalyptic world, but also one that exhibits aspects where people are still trying to make the world a better place, which that
right.
aspect of hope that you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
So you have different characters that are trying to do it in their own way, whether it's Anna trying to do it by reigniting Rasputin and getting Rasputin's side of the story built into it, or Zavala trying to hold his own and protect the city. You get all these miniature stories that just kind of expand into this larger world where so much is up against them, and so many aspects are not great, but you still have a lot of people who are still fighting for it, which is kind of, I mean, it's relatable. It's easy to relate back to the real world, and so much that is fighting against you right now, whether it's dealing with politics or coronavirus or your job. Everything is like, quote unquote, up against you, but there are people still fighting around you, and you can recognize those a little bit easier thanks to a setting like this, which helps you.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing to keep in mind too is when I say that I enjoyed Destiny 1 over Destiny 2, I like, especially for fictional settings, I actually really like black and white worlds, where there's not a lot of like, I don't know, I feel weird saying it, but like, I love a good anti-hero story. Don't get me wrong. Punisher is a great story arc. But but you have to know going into it. You know going into it what you're getting, right? Like it's gonna be you're getting an anti-hero. Deadpool, you know you're getting an anti-hero. You're not going into it for that moral kind of world, black and white. And the thing with like Destiny 1 was, you know, it started out being pretty dark and light. You know, it was and not necessarily good and bad, but it was side 1 and side 2. And like that was, I think, the big draw, you know, everyone's favorite story of, you know, Jaren Ward versus Dredge and Yor and stuff like that. The thing that drew me originally to that story is the same thing that draws me to like the Grimm fairy tales. It's like it's very easy to identify with the villain and who's the hero. Like it's very, because the point of that is to teach a lesson. You know, that's what fantasy has always been about from a historical standpoint, is to teach social norms and social responsibility and, you know, all that. And you don't do that by doing a lot of gray characters, because the kids who's these stories are being told to, they don't understand that. That's not something that children are really good at understanding. Which is why I love the introduction of Destiny with that dark and that light, because that was a very, very fairy tale-esque presentation with a sci-fi twist, which was really cool. As we progressed into Destiny 2, the lines were blurred intentionally, and I understand and I enjoy it, but that's why it's my number 3, because I prefer that fairy tale-esque, you know, definition. Because again, when I start, I don't really. My problem is that I started in a black and white situation, and now we're getting into muddied waters, and there's a part of me. And I don't know how to say this without making it sound bad. It's not how it's, and I'm not intending it to sound the way it's going to sound, but it feels confusing to my brain when you start in a black and white world and then you turn that world into a gray world.
Oh, see, I actually love that aspect of it. It's actually why I prefer Destiny 2 story to Destiny 1.
Yeah, no, and I completely, and like I said, we'll probably definitely get into this conversation in the normal show.
For sure. For sure.
It's my borderline OCD tendency, because like I compartmentalize storytelling in a way of like my analysis of how stories are told is like, when I start reading a story, you know, I kind of have that expectation of like, okay, this is what this is. You know, when I sit down and read Grimm's fairy tales, I know what I'm getting myself into. It's going to be, the villain is doing this. This is why I don't like a lot of the modern retellings of fairy tales, because it's just, I mean, excuse my language for just a second, but it's a bastardization of the story. And it actually confuses the moral of the story for just political easy points, in a lot of my opinion.
I think as far as the reason why I enjoy the Destiny 2 aspect a little bit better is because it's more realistic. It's more like real world, because real world is not always black and white. There's always a gray spot that you don't necessarily see with the initial viewing, right? That's the...
Correct. And that is where I will agree with you. I appreciate Destiny 2's story. I appreciate that type of storytelling, but to be blunt, that's not why I played Destiny.
Oh, I know. That's fine.
I started playing, you know, it's like, it's the reason why I never played The Division. The Division was all about gray and all about, oh, it's hopeless and, you know, all this BS. And that's actually the one reason I saw Division and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. Saw the storyline. I was like, nope, not going to watch. I'm not even going to get involved with it.
Here's the thing, though. Destiny does something really well compared to like the Division. You mentioned the Division specifically just because their storyline is so gray and there's not really a good guy or bad guy described per se.
Yeah, and to be fair, I don't know the story of Division. I just know what the PR, like the start of it is. So I don't mean to pass a generalized judgment on the game quality. I'm just explaining that's why I never got into it, is because from the get-go it just was like, there's no hope. I'm like, all right, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to spend my time with it.
But here's the lovely thing about Destiny is there is this overarching idea of good and bad, right? That is no matter what story you're dealing with, there's still an idea of good and bad. But you have the idea of the shadows of yore with Vale and all of those guys dealing with some of the tinges of the different colors. You're not just dealing with pure white or pure black. In real life, you have a lot of those same types of characters where you have good characters and you have bad characters, but then you have your anti-hero type character that is not really a hero per se, but they're still moving in that direction. Destiny tries to do that in some respects, not necessarily as well as like the Punisher or Deadpool or anybody like that, but they have their aspects of having those in-betweens, which is really great.
Right. And again, I agree with that. My counterpoint is that that's not what I get into a fictional world set for. Like, because exactly what you said, because like you said, that's exactly what the real world is. And I appreciate that Destiny is doing such an amazing job with, I think Trigger's saying this right now. It forces us to understand not just our side, but the side of our enemies or our opponents really would be a better term, because we come to find is they're not necessarily our enemies. Like it's kind of opening that up for interpretation, which is
dealing
great.
With the empathy of things, teaching empathy.
Exactly. But for me, fictional has always been kind of an escape from that grayness, because there's a beauty in the simplicity of having a light and dark.
Sure.
And that's really, now of course I'm going to throw it all out with my number 2 and number 1, but that's neither here or there. I'll explain those then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're up on number 2, so
let's go there. All right. Well, my number 2 is actually Star Wars, the Legends. I don't know enough about the new universe to weigh in on my feelings towards it. But the Legends expanded universe, which is completely and absolutely polar opposite to what I just got done talking about with Destiny. However, this is where I go back to the expectation of what you're going to get yourself into. Like, when I started reading fiction, Star Wars was actually what got me into reading science fiction. Through like the Young Jedi Knights and the Junior Jedi Knights series, and then the X-Wing series, and all these expanded universe series, all the mini stories and all that. And it really taught it exactly what you were just talking about. It really started showing the empathy and the importance of that empathy, because there were characters within the expanded universe with Legends. There were characters who were on the quote unquote bad side, the Empire, who were good people, who were just trying to save their family or, whatever.
Right.
And like, as a young reader, that was something that really was like, I was like, oh, okay, this is where sci-fi can really kind of explore that. And of course that led to, my discovery of like Heinlein and, even to a degree, Hubbard. Hubbard has a few, like with Battlefield Earth, he does a really good job with that as well. So like Star Wars is my number 2, because it was my gateway drug, if you will, into the sci-fi fiction of really everything. Okay.
So my number 2 is actually my gateway drug into fantasy. I'm not a huge sci-fi person. I do like sci-fi settings. I have read quite a few different sci-fi books, but I prefer reading in the fantasy side, specifically in the high fantasy. And the easiest gateway drug into all of that is Lord of the Rings, dealing with Tolkien. And I started reading Tolkien back in like 6th, 7th grade. And I really, really latched on to this world building type thing that he did specifically. Now, granted, he is much, much, much more prolific in all the details that he provides for these different worlds. I mean, if you read into the Silmarillion, you're going to get into way more detail than what you necessarily need to enjoy the story. But
right.
It's kind of like going into Destiny. It's kind of like what we do with Destiny lore, is that we're diving into way more detail than necessarily is needed to understand the base concepts of what's going on in the story. Lord of the
Yeah, and
Rings
to be
does
fair, that could be why I feel like it gets muddy.
Yeah, I mean, I love that kind of thing. Like, I've read all the different books. During high school, I had purchased the transcription to the language of the elves and everything. Yeah. Like, I was that kind of nerd in high school. Boyfriends really didn't like me for that, or girlfriends at the time. But anyway, the story building that he did, and the fact that he was very good at describing the different aspects, whether it's the politics of the time or the landscape or the developmental relationships between all the different characters, he did a really, really good job of doing all of that, as well as developing the language, because language is the pathway to these different worlds. So Tolkien was definitely probably my gateway drug into lore in general. I may have dressed up as now I've blanked on her name. Arwen? No. Mm-hmm. It's the I dressed up as her for Halloween, using one of my high school prom dresses and creating a cloak just because I thought it would be cool, because I was that kind of nerd in high school. It's fine. But that brings us up to number one's Blue. Yeah. What's your number one?
My number one's not going to be a really big surprise to most people. It's The Dark Tower. It's just, I don't know, like, kind of what you... That's why I said, like, my number three, the reason why it's in my number three is the exact opposite of the reason why number one is my number one. Because it is so realistic, in the sense of, like, the darkness that you have to fight, and, you know, but there's still that tendril of hope that, like, there is something that can overcome it. Like, I think King does a really good job with his overarching stories in presenting grittiness without being, like, I'm not going to say it's not horror stories, because they kind of are, but they're not just like gore fests. Like, it's not just senseless violence. Like, there is an overarching purpose to pretty much everything that goes on, especially within the Dark Tower multiverse. There is a purpose to everything. You know, that's the whole thing of, like, the concept of cause a wheel, and, you know, and there is a sense to purpose of everything. So there's that, and I don't know, like, it just that particular fictional world has always resonated with me, mostly probably because it combines a lot of elements that I myself really enjoy. So, like, you have, like, the Western component, you have the science fiction component, you have the fantasy component. You know, there's just really well done writing in my mind. He's got really, really fun sarcasm, especially in the later parts of the series. And it's throughout the entire thing, actually. So I don't know, like, that's always been, you know, that's always been one of my top ones as soon as I found out about it, basically.
Okay. I mean, that's fair, considering how often we haven't brought up Dark Tower in a long, long time, but besides teasing me about Rhea. It
makes me sad. I mean, the grapefruit is a thing, but
it's such a weird,
you should make that.
You
should make that one of your streaming emotes.
The grapefruit?
Petra with it, grapefruit.
No, why would Petra have a grapefruit? I mean, I don't want to mix. God, that's actually one of my slight pet peeves, is mixing genres that don't mix very well. And giving Petra a grapefruit to hold in her hands is just weird. Some people might think it's a dietary thing. Some people might. I mean, what is she doing? But okay, so my number one, surprisingly enough, is not based off of the Jacqueline Carey book that's my number one book series.
It's a good series.
Actually, it's such a good series. But I actually don't like her world development as well as I like Brandon Sanderson's world developments. And we're going to get into this a little bit with the actual episodes coming up, but Brandon Sanderson does a really good job of creating the magic systems of his worlds.
Yeah, okay. Are his worlds separate, though, or are they an overarching universe?
They are, depending, on which ones you're reading. So,
okay.
Mistborn is completely separate. And Stormlight Chronicles is also separate. And then you have he does a steampunk one that Julie has read that I have not read yet. There are a few overarching themes in all of the worlds, but the magic systems are very, very different. Like in Mistborn, you ingest metallic principles. So whether or not you ingest copper or gold or anything like that, you are able to metabolize that metal and create this superpower, essentially. In Stormlight Chronicles, there is a tie between the spiritual realm and the natural realm that you're at, as well as the there's a spiritual, natural, and mental realm, and all three can connect, and you have a bridge through to get to the power source of the spiritual realm through the mental realm of this sprite-like creature. And the main thing that I really love about the Stormlight Chronicles is that in there, broken people are primarily the ones who are able to receive this quote-unquote gift. A lot of them are either broken because they've witnessed a family death, or they've been beaten down. They were like the big brother of a character in the story, and they witness their brother die, and they've gone through all these travesties and trying to survive in the war and everything, and there's a lot of self-doubt, and it's very relatable in so much as that you feel yourself doubting your own ability in the real world, able to connect to a character in his world that constantly doubts himself, constantly doubts his own power, but is also able to do these great things. And all of his characters remain very, very humble, which is a very difficult thing, I think, to do in any sort of setting that gives characters an immense amount of power, is keeping them relatable. And Sanderson does a really great job of that. So I would say that Brandon Sanderson's books in general are going to be my number one. Easy enough. Some of the other ones that I really, really enjoy, I mentioned the Phaedra series, the, oh gosh, what is it called? Kushal's Dart series. That one is totally different in the way that it's developed. It is not developed in the same aspect. There's not a magic system per se, in so much as the bloodline of the different characters are really, really important to the aspects of the overarching themes in the story. The main character in Kushal's Dart, Phaedra, she is what's called, no, I'm blanking on the term of it, unfortunately. She is basically the character that is able to take pain and quote unquote take pleasure in it, which in and of itself does not seem very great as far as a quote unquote superpower or ability, but she is able to function as a spy in the world, which allows her to make her way through different aspects in the politics of things to be able to just discover different things and able to progress through the story and duel against somebody else. And the somebody else that she duels up against is a character named Melisande, who is very, very good at being, and Triggerblade kind of nailed it on the head. Phaedra is a masochist. Melisande is a bit more of a sadist, so it's not so black and white as far as the divisions go. It's very, very different in so much as the characters it's not brutal, there is pain involved as far as the quote-unquote experiences go, but there's no degradation of the characters. Each character is still held up in very high esteem throughout the entire series, which is interesting to take place. So it's a very healthy interaction comparatively, not 50 Shades of Grey, which granted this episode has taken a very, very strange turn now that Blue has left me alone for the moment. But I'm curious what your guys' top 3 are. For me, I would say another also ran for me would be the Borderlands series. Borderlands was one of the very first series I actually took a lot of interest in as far as the world building, but Borderlands is, in comparison to Lord of the Rings or Destiny or even the Brandon Sanderson series, is very, very simplistic. Very simplistic in so much as there's not a whole lot of gray area involved in it. It's very black and white. You have the major corporation, and then you have the people that are dealing with all the aspects below, whether it's they're trying to find the vault or they're trying to find different cures for different things depending on your aspects of who you're following within it. The DCU. Oh, DCU is a really good one. Dealing with Wonder Woman, dealing with, I don't know, the Detective Comics, DC versus Marvel is a very interesting debate as far as the world development of it goes, because you get the aspect of the black and white. Blue was talking about this earlier, especially with Destiny, in particular with D1. But DC does a very good job of creating this black and white world where there is an obvious right and there is an obvious wrong. And Marvel does a really good job of like shading the in between those two. It's not so cut and dry with Marvel. Dark Souls, Bloodborne. Dark Souls, I have a hard time with Dark Souls in so much that Dark Souls seems to be a very black and white world where there's such a hard line between right and wrong in there, in that the characters that you're following or the creatures that you're destroying are very dark and very, I don't know. Dark Souls is one that I really should dive a little bit more into. I really have gotten into more of the Witcher series recently. Witcher has been such a interesting development when you're dealing with not only Geralt and Ciri, but also characters like Triss and, oh gosh, now I can't think of her name. Has black hair.
Yennefer.
Character. Thank you, Yennefer. Yennefer is an interesting character as far as like going into the gray of things. Definitely much more gray in The Witcher rather than black and white. Did you have any also Rens Blue?
Wheel of Time.
Okay.
I mean, Wheel of Time, D&D, White Wolf are pretty much overarching ones. Dune. There was some good
Dune's
stories.
a good one.
Yeah, Dune is a really good one. There's just amazing stories within that one. I mean, there's so many that I just really have. But I mean, as far as like those that really stand out, D&D is like it's just a ginormous overarching.
Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, I mean, it just encompasses so much. Because similar to the Dark Towers, it's a multiverse. Then there's White Wolf with its own.
What are you in White Wolf Blue?
Oh man, I kind of tend to prefer Geru, but I tend to prefer the Geru that are more the oh god, I just blanked on it. But my second one is often I will play mages, but again, they're not the stereotypical mage within the White World universe. If I have to play vampire, I'm trying to remember which ones. I had to play vampire once, and it was a really weird one because I'm not super familiar with the vampire version of White Wolf. Like, I'm familiar with the story, but as far as like mechanics, from the mechanics standpoint, it's kind of an interesting mechanics.
Okay.
Werebear. Werebears were fun. But yeah, no, like I it's been so long since I've actually played a game of White Wolf that I honestly couldn't tell you what I played. I could probably look. I have my character sheets from back in the day, but the ones that I always was more of a support class character, anyways. So which actually mages were really fun to play because you could jack with people. But yeah.
I can't wait to get into the actual episodes, because the different types of characters that are available in each world really colors the world and how the world is developed.
Oh yeah.
Which is going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Okay. I don't know what a Garou is at all. I didn't play any white
werewolf.
Okay.
Garou is werewolf. Werebears were, I think it's Garal. I think is the Garal is the werewolf or werebear. Basically you have like the were blank. You have pretty much any predominant large animals. So you have you have were sharks, you have a were spider. Those were really weird and annoying to deal with. Depending on the level of depth that you wanted to go into, there were some pretty interesting ones. There were were snakes. Yeah, the Anasis were the spiders. They were creepy. The were snakes were fun to play.
That one makes sense, because Anasi is a type of the old folklore from Africa, isn't it?
He's the trickster / god of wisdom.
Yeah. I remembered something. Woot.
Yeah, the Pharaoh is all these shifters. Naga were so cool. You had like werecats, you had werewolves, werebears and werewolves were actually a lot of the common ones, mostly because those were like your stereotypical fighters and tanks. The werewolves, like the Garou, were very tribal. So you had a very wide spectrum within the werewolf ranks, from like the full out berserkers to the actual studious ones. The werebears were, the rabid Care Bear. It's not far from true. Like, it's not far from the fact. Like, it's just, werebears were scary. They would tear stuff up.
Cool.
But yeah, it was fun. Like, and then like, the nice thing about White Wolf was they did a really good job of having the desperate titles. So you had like Vampire the Masquerade, you had Werewolf I think, what was that? The Werewolf the Apocalypse, you had Hunter the Reckoning, and I think Mage, I can't remember what the Mage was, Mage the Ascension. And then you had like pretty much everything had its own series, but you could also blend them. So like you could have a game where you would have a vampire and a werewolf, or a vampire and a hunter. Like, usually if you're playing a hunter, you were at odds with the supernatural characters, but you could have all of them at the same table, because it was designed in such that it was basically a giant puzzle piece.
Right. But some games were built more off of the mechanics of the games versus the politics of the games and everything, I'm sure.
Yes, White Wolf.
I know Vampire Masquerade was way more politics based than some of the others.
The Vampire series was very politics. They all, like, White Wolf had a pretty good spread of, like, there were definitely predominant tones. Like, Vampire was definitely political, but that's not to say that a Garou, like a werewolf game, wouldn't get political. Like, because there was very much tribal politics involved with the subclasses or the sub groups. Same with like Wraith and Mummy. I don't know much about my Hunter. Hunter was 100% political. Like, you could get into fights, but Hunter was one of the ones that you had to play both. You had to play on both sides of what was called the Veil. So like. Which is also why I think Vampire was a little bit more political, is because both those titles you were basically balancing between the two sides, and you couldn't let the other side know about the other side. Like, especially the humans could not know about the supernatural, because they would go insane. Like, there was actually ramifications in game of humans finding out about it, which was kind of a balancing act. So there was that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and the world building is just, oh man, it's really, really. Oh yeah, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. That's a good one. Chat.
Interesting. Well, I'm actually really excited to get into the main chat of this. So for those of you listening to this on Wednesday or later, thank you for listening into Top 3. We're going to switch over to the main episode because Green is getting impatient and wants to talk about world building in general because it's one of her favorite topics. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for hanging out with us. And remember, everybody loves a list.